I am currently paying off my 6-figure student loan debt, and you might be wondering, was it worth it? Every single situation is different, so I thought it'd be helpful if I made a video where I break down how to decide if student loans are worth it and talk about my own situation and how I feel about it now. As always, your finances are your responsibility. And while I'm happy to share my perspective and experience, I'm not responsible for your choices, and you should research beyond me. Let's start with my loans and what they're for. I borrowed $120,000 from the US federal government to pay for my doctor of occupational therapy. The loans grew to $127,000 with interest that accrued while I was in school because graduate student loans do that, and it's silly, but it's our system. I had completed my undergrad debt-free because of scholarships, working while I was in school, and some help from my parents, and it would be dishonest to tell you anything other than that. To work as an occupational therapist in the United States, you need a degree in occupational therapy. There is no other path. Right now, it is possible to get a master's in occupational therapy, but that will be changing in 2027, and I might be interested in re-entering academia as a professor, and I was also definitely interested in research, so I chose the doctorate level path. But that's just semantics. Personally, I knew I wanted to go into rehab since I was about 15 years old, and I chose my undergraduate college and degree as one that would set me up for post-grad education. So this was a long time vision and plan for myself, and that's just how I got here. But how did we get to the point of student loans at all? Because other countries don't have them. In the United States, student loans were initially offered to Harvard students in the mid-1800s to make Harvard education accessible, but this was through Harvard itself, and student loans would pay Harvard back. This was 30 years before the Department of Education was even founded. So in the late 1800s, they founded the Department of Education to boost and regulate the education system. In 1944, we passed the GI Bill, which allowed World War II veterans access to education. And as this came out and started to go into effect, vets made up almost 40% of US college students. So I think that's just evidence that if education is affordable, people will pursue it. Do with that information what you will. In 1965, the federal government started offering grants, scholarships, and loans to people who demonstrated need. But these loans were subsidized by the government, and students weren't covering the interest until 1992, when the government passed an act that made it so that the borrowers were responsible for the interest on their loans. This was a huge change, and it was essentially the birth of our modern day student loan system. Also, throughout this time, the cost of education exploded, and we can debate about why it exploded, but at the end of the day, schools are competing for students' dollars. In order to do so, they began to offer more of an experience with gyms and clubs and social activities that all demanded funding. And then they also have their boards that demand profit. Even not-for-profit universities have to make money. The narrative around it became something that you had to do and an experience, a coming of age period. As colleges became this experience more than just this educational opportunity, things went a little nuts. In 2005, outstanding student loan debt was $391 billion. Only 3 years later, in 2008, that amount had doubled to $691 billion. As of 2021, outstanding student loan balances are $1.7 trillion. My loan debt is barely even a fraction of a percentage of what's been borrowed. And unlike many students, I knew and understood the cost of borrowing the money before I took out a dime. Many students are offered financial aid packages at the age of 18 with little to no education on what's being involved, and with the terminology of financial aid, it doesn't feel like something you have to pay back. So let's chat about some of the common terminology in these packages that helps describe the money. First is a grant. A grant is money that is given. Often grants are available to students that demonstrate some sort of need. For example, a Pell Grant. This money does not need to be repaid. A scholarship is also money that's given, and this money is awarded often based on merit, sometimes with some aspect of need involved as well. This is also money that does not need to be repaid. A loan is money that is borrowed, sometimes with a fee to initiate the loan, as well as interest that accrues on the principal balance, which is the original balance that you borrowed from whoever you're borrowing from. If the interest is not repaid, the balance will grow. This money does need to be repaid. Student loans are inherently difficult to understand. Work with your financial aid counselors to understand the cost of education and try to make decisions accordingly. So let's talk about my loans, and we'll start with the ROI, because people are often quick to say that my borrowing was not worth it, even though they don't know anything about my situation or opportunities. So like I said, I got my undergraduate education in health and exercise science. Let's go specifics. With this degree, I could have gotten a job in a gym and eventually worked my way up to manage that gym. As a manager, after a few years of work, I would have been making about $50,000 a year with little to no opportunity to grow past that. And just so we're clear, before I get into this, I would not have been happy in this line of work. I do not like personal training. I do not like the fitness space for my employment. I love it for my personal life, but we're just just focused on numbers right now. So as an entry-level occupational therapist, I have a salary of about $76,000 a year. I did take a pay cut to get the experience I want. I work in a level 1 trauma center where I have the opportunity to do both acute care and inpatient rehab, and I see patients that are very, very acutely ill, which is great experience to have from the get-go. But I do have friends that are making upwards of $90,000 in IRFs starting out. But on my income, not based on anyone else's, I am making about $26,000 more than I would have been making with my undergraduate degree, which means my loans will have paid for themselves in about 4.8 years, and everything after that is profit. So that's a pretty good rate of return. I think it's also important to talk about my upbringing because education is something that is heavily valued in the home that I was raised in. Both of my parents are college professors, and learning was threaded into everyday life. My parents and myself don't believe that college is a path for everyone, and we have varying opinions on the US education system, but I think understanding how I was raised and the privilege that I had by having two parents who understand the college process is important to understand my perspective on why I would choose college at all and how it was even an option for me. I've also alluded heavily to the fact that I've wanted my job for a very long time, and I am very happy and fulfilled in my line of work. Fulfillment doesn't put food on the table, but it really does make me enjoy the food when I eat it. I see a lot of people comment on videos where they say, well, you shouldn't have taken loans, you should have been a real estate agent or been a plumber or a hairstylist, and I'm doing those things and I'm rich. And I'm so happy that those people found a path that works for them, but that path would not have worked for me. I would have been miserable every single day. So basically, with the combination of increased income that was available to me with my level of education and fulfillment from the job that I get, as well as my ability to live within my value system, the specialized higher education that I got and was able to pay for with loans was worth it. But this might not be the case for everyone. So if you're looking to borrow money for schools, consider the following. Can you do it cheaper? Can you take prereqs at a community college, choose a state school over a private institution, or apply for private scholarships to help reduce the cost of education? What are you even borrowing money for? Paying your tuition with student loans is one thing, paying rent with loans is another. It is possible to afford your cost of living through school by working. I did it, so have many other people. No, it's not the easiest path, but it'll save you money in the long run. What is the actual cost of the loans that you are taking? When you borrow $20,000, you will owe that $20,000 back plus the interest on those $20,000. So let's say your interest is about 7%, because that's pretty standard right now. That means on that $20,000, you will have an additional $14,000 in interest over 10 years. So if you're borrowing money for rent and your rent over 4 years is $20,000, now your actual cost of your rent is $34,000, or even your tuition. You have to know the total cost that it's going to be in order to know if you can afford to repay it. I'll link some simple loan calculators below that you can use to understand the cost of your loans, and if you're borrowing from the federal government, 10 years is pretty standard for their repayment plans. Next, what will your ROI be? What are you going to school for? I live in a state that mandates that jobs post the salary involved with the job in the job listing. Not all states require this level of transparency. So use tools like Glassdoor to see what you might be able to expect in your field. Generally speaking, if you don't know what you're going to school for, don't borrow money for it. In any other situation, no bank would give you money to figure out your life. And I think it's predatory for them to allow students to borrow money for something that they don't really know what they're doing. Loans can be used as an investment to improve your life, but they are not free money and should not be treated as such. These are all important things to consider to decide what's going to be best fit for you. But most significantly, it's important to know what the cost of borrowing is going to be, as well as what your income opportunity is going to be. I think also in our current climate, it's important not to rely on any student loan forgiveness. I have considered doing public student loan forgiveness because I work in a nonprofit healthcare space that allows me to do it. Another thing for me is that I don't really want to be working full-time for 10 years when I can pay my loans off quicker than that with frugal living and knowledge on my financial situation. So relying on such a path may not be the best step forward, and I think it's important to acknowledge that those are not guaranteed. While they are a useful tool for people to open up their financial opportunities, it is not something that you should count on if you are going into school and borrowing money for it. So at the end of the day, those are important things that I would consider if I were faced with borrowing money for my education. I'm sure there's more, and if anyone has any helpful ideas, go ahead and leave them down below. If you have any questions, do the same. Like always, please subscribe. It really supports my channel, and if you are interested in finances and getting your feet under you, I think that I might be a helpful resource for you. YouTube thinks you'll like this video, so you should watch it and see if the algorithm's right, and I'll see you in the next one.